The sun filled the view screen, impossibly large. Elena remembered when it had been just another star, a bright point of light among countless others. Now it dominated everything, their vision, their thoughts, their remaining time. "How long?" she asked, not turning from the screen. David checked the navigation display, though they both knew the answer. 43 minutes until we crossed the Roche limit. After that, his voice trailed off. They both understood what came next. Elena nodded, her face bathed in the golden-orange glow. It was beautiful in its way. Their destroyer. 6 days earlier, the Artemis VII had been on a routine maintenance mission to the heliopause monitoring stations. Elena Vasquez, mission specialist and solar physicist, had been running diagnostics on the external sensors when the first alarm sounded. "What's the reading?" called David Chen, pilot and Elena's husband of 11 years, from the cockpit. "Radiation spike? But that's expected during a diagnostic reboot," Elena replied, her fingers dancing across the console. "System should normalize in 3, 2. The second alarm blared before she reached 1, and then a third joined in discordant harmony. "That's not right." Her voice remained calm, the product of years of training. "David, I'm seeing cascade failures in the propulsion system." David's response was drowned out by a violent shudder that tore through the ship. The Artemis lurched sideways, and Elena was thrown against her restraints. "Stabilizers are offline," David shouted over the alarms. "Main engine showing critical." The explosion was more felt than heard, a deep, visceral concussion that seemed to compress time itself. For a moment, Elena thought she'd lost consciousness. When her vision cleared, the cabin was bathed in the red glow of emergency lighting. "David," she called, unbuckling herself with trembling hands. "I'm here." He responded, his voice strained. "Navigation's shot, communications down. We've lost the main engine and most of the RCS thrusters." Elena made her way to the cockpit, grabbing handholds as the ship continued to tumble. David was bleeding from a cut above his eye, but his hands were steady on what remained of the controls. "I've managed to stop the spin," he said, not looking up. "But we're drifting." Elena checked the auxiliary display. Her heart sank. "We're falling toward the sun," she said quietly. David finally looked up, meeting her eyes. "Yes." They spent the first 24 hours trying everything. Elena rewired communication arrays while David attempted to repurpose the remaining RCS thrusters. They worked in tandem, sometimes in silence, sometimes thinking aloud to each other. A habit formed over years of marriage and missions together. "If we redirect power from life support to the emergency boosters," Elena suggested during hour 18, "we'd gain maybe 30 seconds of thrust." David finished her thought. "Not enough to change our trajectory significantly." By the second day, the reality had settled in. Their orbit was decaying rapidly. Without main engines, they couldn't escape the sun's gravitational pull. Elena sat in the observation bay, a tablet in her lap displaying orbital calculations. David found her there, her face illuminated by the screen's blue light. "I've run it 15 different ways," she said without looking up. "There's no scenario where we have enough delta V to achieve escape velocity." David sat beside her, their shoulders touching. "How long?" Elena handed him the tablet. The projection was clear. 6 days until they crossed the point of no return, the threshold where the sun's tidal forces would begin to tear the Artemis apart. "We should send a message," David said after a long silence. "Even if they can't save us, they should know what happened." Elena nodded. Together they moved to the communications station and began assembling a makeshift transmitter from parts of the damaged system. "This is mission specialist Elena Vasquez and pilot David Chen of the Artemis VII," Elena spoke clearly into the makeshift recorder. "Date is July 18th, 2089. We experienced a catastrophic engine failure during routine maintenance at Heliopause Station 4. She detailed the technical aspects, the cascade failure, the explosion, their current trajectory. David added information about their attempts at repairs and the exact nature of the damage. "We've exhausted all options for altering our course," Elena continued. "Based on current trajectory, we will cross the solar Roche limit on July 24th, 2089 at approximately 14:22 UTC. The formal part complete, Elena paused. David reached over and took her hand. "Mom, Dad," he said, his voice steady but softer than before, "I want you to know we're okay. We're together, and we've had more happiness than most people get in twice the time." Elena squeezed his hand. Lucia, Miguel, she addressed her younger siblings. Take care of each other, and tell our nieces and nephews about the stars. They continued, leaving messages for friends, colleagues, mentors. When they finished, David attached their improvised transmitter to the ship's remaining power source. Will it reach Earth? He asked. Elena calculated the signal strength against the distance. Eventually. Might take years, but yes, it'll reach them. They launched the message into the void, a digital bottle tossed into a cosmic ocean. By the third day, the sun had grown noticeably larger in their viewports. The ship's temperature controls were working overtime, and they'd moved most of their activities to the north side of the vessel, furthest from the growing heat. They'd settled into a strange routine. In the morning, though morning was an arbitrary concept without planetary rotation, they performed necessary maintenance to keep life support functioning. They checked the structural integrity, monitored radiation levels, and rationed their supplies. But as the fourth day dawned, they tacitly agreed to spend less time on survival tasks and more time simply being together. Remember our first mission? Elena asked as they shared a meal of rehydrated pasta. The ISS Mars Relay Station? David smiled. You were so annoyed they partnered you with the cocky pilot. You were cocky, she laughed, showing off with those unnecessary maneuvers during docking. I was trying to impress you. I know. They reminisced about their early days, the awkward flirtation during long shifts, their first kiss in the observation bubble of Mars Station, the proposal during a spacewalk. I never told you, David said, but I almost dropped the ring when I was trying to attach it to the tether. Elena's eyes widened. You're kidding. After all that planning? Almost became the first man to lose an engagement ring in orbit around Mars. They laughed together, and for a moment the growing sun seemed distant again. As night cycle came, they moved their sleeping bags to the observation bay. Despite the danger, they wanted to see the stars. The ship's filters dimmed the sun's glare, allowing the rest of the cosmos to shine through. We've seen things most humans never will, Elena murmured as they lay side by side, hands intertwined. The Earth rising over the lunar horizon, the rings of Saturn up close. The first snowfall on Mars, David added. Worth it, Elena said softly. All of it. David turned to look at her, his face half in shadow. Even this ending? She met his gaze. Even this. On the fifth day, as the sun grew to fill nearly a quarter of their view screen, they decided to dance. It started when Elena found an old playlist on her personal tablet, songs they'd listened to during training, on missions, at their wedding. I haven't heard this in years, David said as the opening notes of an old jazz standard filled the cabin. Elena held out her hand. Dance with me? In the reduced gravity of the failing ship, they drifted together in a slow, weightless waltz. Elena's dark hair floated around her face as David spun her gently. We're better at this in space, he laughed. Remember our wedding? I kept stepping on your dress. My grandmother was convinced you were drunk, Elena recalled. I told her you were just gravity-challenged after 6 months on the station. They moved through the ship's main cabin, avoiding equipment and floating debris from the explosion. The music shifted to something faster, and their dance became more playful, twirling and pushing off walls, creating their own choreography in 3 dimensions. For a few precious hours, they were just Elena and David again, not dying astronauts, but partners in every sense, moving in harmony as they had for over a decade. When they finally stopped, breathless and laughing, Elena looked out the viewport. The sun seemed closer than ever, its surface no longer a smooth disk, but a roiling mass of plasma and magnetic fields. It's my life's work, she said softly. I've spent years studying it, and it's still the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. David wrapped his arms around her from behind. Even though it's going to kill us? She leaned back against him. Maybe because of that. It's not malicious. It just is. This enormous ancient force that creates and destroys without judgment. They stood together, watching the fire that had given life to their world and would soon take theirs. On the morning of the 6th day, Elena found David writing in a physical notebook, an anachronism in their digital world, but one he'd always maintained. What are you working on? She asked, floating toward him with a packet of breakfast. He showed her the page, a sketch of her asleep, her hair forming a dark halo around her face. I wanted to leave something tangible, he explained. even if no one ever finds it. Elena touched the page gently. It's beautiful. I've been keeping this journal since our first mission together, David said. It's mostly about you. He handed her the book. Elena turned the pages carefully, finding sketches, notes, poems, a chronicle of their life together through David's eyes. Their first meeting, the moment he realized he loved her. Their wedding day. Quiet moments on long missions. I had no idea you were doing this, she whispered. It was just for me at first, he admitted. A way to process everything I was feeling, but now... Elena understood. In the face of oblivion, the human impulse to leave a mark, to say I was here, I loved, I lived, was overwhelming. She took a pen from the storage compartment. On a blank page, she began to write. David, if all the universes in all of creation had been laid before me, I would have chosen this one, the one where I found you, loved you, and flew among the stars with you, even knowing how it ends. She added more, memories, confessions, gratitudes. David wrote his response beneath. They passed the journal back and forth throughout the day, filling pages with their final thoughts to each other. By the final day, the ship's cooling systems were failing. The heat was becoming unbearable in parts of the cabin, and they'd confined themselves to the small emergency shelter with its additional radiation shielding. Elena checked the navigation display. 3 hours. David nodded, wiping sweat from his brow. The structural integrity will start to fail before that. Maybe another hour before the hull begins to warp. They'd prepared as best they could. Their journal was sealed in the ship's most durable container, a futile gesture perhaps, but one that gave them comfort. Their final message was broadcasting on repeat, though they had no way of knowing if anyone had received it. Now there was nothing left but to wait. Are you afraid? Elena asked, her head resting on David's shoulder. He considered the question carefully. Not of dying exactly, but I hate that our story ends here. That we don't get to see what comes next, for us, for humanity. We were supposed to retire next year, Elena said. Buy that house in New Zealand. With the greenhouse and the ridiculous telescope you wanted. It wasn't ridiculous. It was perfectly reasonable for an amateur astronomer. They smiled at the old argument, comforted by its familiarity. I would have planted apple trees, David said softly, a whole orchard. Elena closed her eyes, picturing it. We would have grown old there, watching the stars from our porch. In another world, David murmured. In another world, she agreed. The ship groaned as the heat continued to rise. External sensors were failing one by one, but the view screen still showed the sun, now so large it seemed to encompass everything. How long? Elena asked, not turning from the screen. David checked the navigation display, though they both knew the answer. 43 minutes until we crossed the Roche limit. After that, his voice trailed off. They both understood what came next. Elena nodded, her face bathed in the golden-orange glow. It's beautiful, in its way. Yes, David agreed. Our destroyer. They'd removed their flight suits. They would provide no protection now and wore only their basic clothing. Elena's dark hair was tied back from her face, and David had trimmed his beard that morning in a final act of normalcy. I've been thinking, Elena said, about time dilation. David looked at her questioningly. As we approach the sun, time will slow down for us relative to Earth, she explained. Only by milliseconds, but still. Our last moments will last longer from our perspective. David smiled slightly. Leave it to you to find the scientific silver lining. It's what I do. She turned to face him fully. Do you have any regrets about us? He shook his head without hesitation. None? You? Just one, she said, that I waited 3 months to say yes when you asked me out the first time. Those were a very long 3 months, he laughed. The ship shuddered violently and warning alarms began to sound throughout the cabin. David checked the readings. Hull temperature critical, he reported. We've got maybe 20 minutes before systems failure. Elena took his hand. Let's see it properly then. One last time. Together they moved to the observation bay. The main view screen was there, currently filtered to protect their eyes. Elena reached for the controls. Are you sure? David asked. She nodded. We're solar physicists. Let's do our job until the end. David stood beside her as she adjusted the filters, not removing them completely, which would have blinded them instantly, but reducing them enough to see the sun's true face. The image that filled the screen took their breath away. They could see sunspots, prominences, granulation patterns, all the features they'd studied throughout their careers, but with an immediacy and scale that was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. Corona mass ejection at the northwestern quadrant, Elena noted, her scientist's mind still cataloging observations. Filament eruption along the equator, David added. They continued this way, calling out features as the ship carried them closer to the star. It was their final act of discovery, of adding to human knowledge, even if that knowledge would die with them. Another violent shudder ran through the ship, stronger than before. The lights flickered and died, leaving only the glow from the view screen. Life support failing, David said, checking his wrist display. Environmental controls offline. The temperature was rising rapidly now. Elena could feel sweat beading on her skin, but she didn't move from the viewport. 15 minutes to Roch limit, David reported, but the ship won't last that long. Elena turned to him. I love you, she said simply. Every day with you has been a gift. David pulled her close. Loving you has been the greatest adventure of my life. The ship gave another groan as the outer hull began to warp under the intense heat and gravitational forces. The view screen image distorted, then stabilized. It won't be long now, Elena whispered. They held each other as the ship continued its inexorable journey toward the sun. The heat was becoming unbearable, but neither of them suggested moving to a more shielded area. There was no point now. Talk to me, David said, his voice strained. Tell me something. Anything. Elena thought for a moment. Did I ever tell you about the first time I saw a solar eclipse? No, he said, holding her tighter. I was 7, she began. My father drove us 6 hours to be in the path of totality. I remember being so impatient, complaining about the drive. She continued her story as the ship's systems failed around them. How the world had gone silent as the moon covered the sun. How the stars had appeared in the daytime sky. How she'd decided in that moment that she would devote her life to understanding the sun. And now here we are, she finished, her voice barely audible over the groaning of the ship's hull. David kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. Full circle, he whispered. A series of sharp cracks echoed through the ship as the outer hull began to break apart. The artificial gravity fluctuated, then failed completely. They drifted together in the center of the observation bay, wrapped in each other's arms. The view screen displayed its final image, the sun's surface, now close enough to see individual convection cells in horrifying detail. Then it, too, went dark as the system failed. Light began to stream through the growing cracks in the hull. Pure, white, overwhelming light. Look at me, David said urgently. Just look at me. Elena focused on his face, the face she'd loved for more than a decade, now illuminated by the light of their approaching death. His eyes reflected tiny suns. I would choose this again, she told him, her voice steady despite everything. Every moment. Me too, he said. All of it. The hull integrity alarm sounded one final time, then cut off abruptly. The ship groaned, metal twisting and warping beyond its tolerances. In their final moments, as the Artemis VII began to break apart around them, Elena and David held each other's gaze, 2 human souls facing the end together, bathed in the light of the star that had given their world life and would now take theirs. The ship crossed the Roche limit, and then light.